I paid money for this. So I was wandering around inside my local Barnes & Noble looking for Christmas gifts for my various loved ones when I stumbled upon the $3 bin. Cheap bins are magical places where one can find the absolute worst society has to offer. The drudges of creativity, the unsightly and probably horribly diseased third cousin of quality, the wet socks of capitalism, and more importantly, somebody's passion project that probably contains a lot of heart and soul, but because they lack technical knowledge or polish, makes it delightfully funny to poke at, because it's not our dreams hanging out to be ridiculed, our dreams being stoned for simply existing. We can laugh in the safety of the internet's anonymous bosom, knowing that we too have dreams just like this garbage, and we cry inside because we know that the ridicule and vicar we spit is the same we fear receiving, the ultimate mental roadblock that prevents us from really putting ourselves out there. We don't have the guts to live our dreams, but we can at least tear down anyone else who tries so that when we're alone at night, we can tell ourselves our dreams deserved to die, because if we tried, we'd be just like them. And the only thing worse than someone who rants about things on the internet is a person who rants about things on the internet who tried to be more and failed. Imperial Legends Battle for the Kairoshino Priestess stole my heart the minute I saw this cover, because what a cover! The mixture between traced work and freeform art, the white remnants of an improperly used fill bucket, the gamer RGB lights in the background. They say to never judge a book by its cover, but how could you not fall in love with this face? And already I knew I had to take it home with me, but just to be sure, I had to read the back. I had to know the true extent of this abomination. The legend continues as Korea's journey is just beginning. Patience will be tested as she explores who she was meant to be. She will test the rules on who she needs to be while discovering what true love is, while she finally opens her heart to someone ready to put his life on the line for her. With the world on the verge of an epic war, courage will be tested as trust is instilled in a girl as she rises to her full potential. As Korea discovers who she was meant to be, challenges will appear and riddles to be solved to break the chains of a past that has hindered her in the past. As the Imperial War approaches, worlds will be in balance as a new legend is born, as universes collide in an epic tale of heroism, strength, and love. Trust will be tested as countries hang in the balance of freedom and foreign domination. Heroism will emerge in a young girl who is a social outcast. Strength will be tested, and countries fight to protect their people. Love will be born from the seed of protection as one man protects the only person who can save their world. My dear friendly friends, this is not just a bad book. This is a bad book to end all bad books. And it's a sequel. Part 2 in a series of 7 books. And yes, I did read this book without any context. I did read it in its entirety while simultaneously laughing and crying, and I am about to subject you to the same pain because this is the kind of premium trash that can only come as a gift from the cheap bin gods. So let me tell you a story. This story starts with a man named Bart, or sometimes Jasper, as the author either forgets her own characters' names or uses the Control-Find-Replace function to edit her work without actually reading it. And I don't blame her. One of the first sentences I was forced to read was, Bart, as he thought, as he riddled his mind trying to find answers that he could use in his defense, ease his mind. And reading that made me think I was having a stroke. I was not. The whole book is like this. So Bart is at home freaking out because apparently his doppelganger from another world came to this one and caused a car accident for his friend Korea, who is now in the hospital dying. His incoherent ramblings about how he now understands misunderstood people are ended when his doppelganger comes to demand information about Korea. They have a very passionate back and forth until Bart unleashes his greatest line. As it has been said, the gun is mightier than the sword. He whips out a gun and is promptly disarmed by his doppelganger's sword, and then the doppelganger ties a sheet around Bart's neck and throws him off of the roof, killing him. Then we meet Arturio in the fantasy world, who has just had his brothel burned down. Arturio is in a majority of the story, but does absolutely nothing but exist in the background, so I'm going to ignore him entirely. Next we meet Cisco, the currently homeless prince whose home, Melothia, was taken over by a man named Mushiko. Within 3 sentences, he is sent to a dungeon. There he meets the most gorgeous woman he's ever seen, who just happens to be an old playmate of his from childhood, Kiara. Kiara is also unimportant, so all you need to know is that Cisco claims he has loved her ever since they were kids, and he is desperately trying to end this war to get back to her. Oh, did I mention there's a war coming? Right. So there is this thing called an Imperial War, where periodically the 4 regions of the fantasy world Kyokyu, the 4 regions of the fantasy world Kyokyu gather hot young girls from other worlds as priestesses who are given 2 magic stones called Kairoshino stones to get magical powers over 2 of 8 elements, and fight each other to the death for something. It's never really clear what the winner gets because Mushiko and the Shirin region have already invaded and taken over Melothia in the Shigerimashita region without needing to go through this war, so if they just don't show up, they can march their army and take over their rival countries anyway, because there doesn't seem to be a consequence to not basing their entire conquest plans on a scantily clad girl who just got her lightning hands 2 days before the big fight. So now that you totally understand what's going on, let's finally meet our main characters, Korea and Trace, who are currently hiding from soldiers inside the ruins of an ancient mountain city. Korea is a young woman who trained at some martial arts school on Earth and had at least a couple friends, but was a social outcast for some reason. It might have had to do with her raven hair with crimson streaks. Korea was brought here to be a priestess by Mushiko and his peon Logan, we'll get to him later, but ultimately joins up with the Shigerimashita region instead. Korea is accompanied by her druid Trace, a dude who... Look, even Korea asks what a druid does, and all she gets is basically an explanation akin to Aragon's, "A rider can live without a dragon, but a dragon dies without a rider." So, he's there to be her wise mentor, love interest, and secretly kind of father figure? We'll get to that too. Actually, that moment is now. Apparently, these 2 characters didn't talk a lot in the first book because the first thing they do is exposit about who they are to each other. In this talk, Trace reveals that 600 years ago, a baby was supposed to be a priestess, but babies are hardly good fighters, so Trace teleported the baby to Earth, which actually runs on a different time than Kyokyu, so she aged like 20 years before her return, and then for those 600 years he has been creepily watching her grow from the shadows. That baby was Korea, and this twist never affects the plot. Then we switch back to Earth, where Jasper has been researching a legend in Japan to help Korea's predicament, and has now returned to America. He gets a ride from another pointless friend, Corey, where they talk about how impossible this all is. They then go to Bart's house and witness his murder. Did you remember this book started off with a murder? I sure didn't. Anyway, the only thing important about this sequence of events is that we learned Bart's last name. It's Smithson. His name is Bart Smithson. Then Cisco meets up with Trace, and Trace tells him Korea was the lost baby. Cisco is like, okay, cool, so she can fight now? And Trace says, yeah, and then Cisco leaves. Trace then talks to Korea about her martial arts teacher Kuriko and how she was probably a previous priestess. Korea also finds a spooky grave with her name on it, but as you can probably guess, it never comes up again. Next, we meet even more characters, like Kenna and Kyler, 2 people who worked for the Melothian royal family before their country was invaded. They meet up with Skylar, a different country's prince, and talk about preparing an army in these caves they're hiding in. Kyler seems to be leading the training effort, and he will never be mentioned again until the war is over. Same with Skylar, who was only here to make a weird pass at Kenna and be called a creep, because Kenna is Cisco's girl, even though 30 pages ago he professed his undying love to Kiara. But now we're back to Earth, where Jasper visits Karia's body and sees Bart's doppelganger and murderer just hanging out. The Doppelbart explains that he just wants to make sure Karia is alive, even though he is the one that caused her car accident in the first place. He leaves, and we never understand why he was there, or his reason to be on Earth in the first place. And now we finally get to properly meet Logan. Logan is Bart's doppelganger, and one of the heirs to the Malothian throne. He conspired with Mushiko to take over the country, but Mushiko kinda betrayed him by taking the throne for himself. And everyone in the cave resistance apparently knows this, but they let him stay with them anyway and pretend they don't know he's a traitor. So he walks around asking questions about where his brother is until a wise butler dude named Xavier tells him to pound sand. And then gets promptly murdered by the clearly evil guy they let live in their camp. Logan then walks 5 minutes away from the caves to meet up with Mushiko because their secret resistance camp is literally within spitting distance of the captured castle. Kenna follows Logan and gets captured immediately. Meanwhile, Karia is training in weapons for the first time. Trace starts to attack her and she kind of fumbles because she's never used a weapon before, which makes Trace very mad. So mad, in fact, that he throws his stick to the ground a la 5-year-old temper tantrum and stomps away. It turns out that he's so mad because he loves her and doesn't want to be her sparring partner. So that Arturio dude takes over and they never talk about training again. Karia then shows Trace the wonders of technology through an MP3 player and a phone, which both still work in this world sometimes, before receiving a text from Jasper that boils down to, saw some weird pics on your Instagram? She then remembers a prophecy an oracle told her about having to choose between two paths. How can she fight this war if she remembers that people care for her on Earth? So she destroys the phone so that she can never receive a message from Earth again. Trace then inserts magic stones into her body and she collapses. We get a brief break to visit Earth and then Mushiko's lair, but both these parts just prove that absolutely no one in this story knows what they're doing. Jasper goes to Bart's funeral and rants about how he was murdered and he will get his revenge. And Mushiko rants about how his army is incompetent because at this point he still somehow believes Karia is going to be his region's priestess. And then the book just gets really repetitive and boring. They talk about how Kariko could be a past priestess again. Jasper tries to contact Karia again. Kenna dies in jail, causing Cisco to forget that Kiara is his true love again. And Cisco cuts off Logan's head after he learns he's been murdering again. And then we finally move towards this war everyone has been complaining about this entire time. Karia goes to the Temple of the Oracles to fulfill her duty as priestess and does some sort of test where she picks a door out of 3 and then has to not drown in the ghost of priestesses past. She passes by repeating teen angst nonsense about how the world has hurt her too much in the past, that nothing can hurt her now, and she gets to magical girl transform into her belly dancer form from the cover. Then she burns this book that was tied to a book on Earth in her 5th attempt to sever herself from her past, and gets an even more Super Saiyan belly dancer form. With her powers over water and mind reading, and her exposed belly, she's ready to fight. But all 3 of the other regions are not. In a comical choice by the author, all this training Karia is doing is to fight 3 other very unprepared girls that seem to have been found in the closest alleyway to each region. Like, the oracles who gave Karia her full priestess powers have met none of the other priestesses, making Karia the clear winner. One region has a girl who came from a war-torn world who has spent most of the past month recovering from those injuries and literally just cries about wanting to go home. Another region has a girl who they found on their way to the battlefield who had to take the magical stones immediately and might be awake by the time the fighting starts. The Last Priestess is from Mushiko's region, but first I want to tell you about a character named Siana. Siana is the most funny and incompetent character in this entire book. The author wants you to believe she's some hotshot spy and assassin out to kill Karia, but every time she shows up, she gets a sentence out before she's discovered and has to flee. The first time is in the cave with the Resistance, where she literally goes up to Kyler and demands to see Prince Logan as she claims she's the princess for their region. Kyler kicks her out because Korea is their priestess already, and everyone knows Logan is a traitor. Then she tries the same tactic on Mushiko, and it almost works, except that one page later, he goes into a haunted palace, and the ghost of the last king apparently haunts this world for one purpose: to ruin Siana's plans by telling Mushiko she's a fraud. So then he kicks her out too. So now Mushiko needs a real priestess fast, because the war started, yesterday. Fortunately for him, his true love, Alexandra, has come through and has brought a feral priestess. His heart swells with affection, noting that only a woman as cunning and beautiful as her will be good enough for him, and the feral priestess just choked her to death. Right in front of him. And he didn't even move a muscle. So right before the war starts, Jasper, now teaming up with Korea's martial arts teacher Kuriko, tries to contact Korea again. They have just discovered that her body is rapidly aging, and that if she doesn't come home soon, her body will age to death. So they use some magic dirt, and he decides to tell her, "I miss you, and hope that you are safe. I hope you have a safe and quick return." You know, the most important thing he needed to tell her right now. She replies, "Lose my number," and he walks off dejectedly back to the hospital to wait by her dying corpse. Kuriko, on the other hand, tries again, but this time by mind melding with Korea. After telling Korea that her body is dying, Korea blasts Kuriko out of her brain, and Kuriko slams against her dojo's walls on Earth, where she slowly bleeds to death. But there is no time to mourn, for the battle begins in the morning when Siana's region challenges Korea's region because Siana's spy intelligence says Korea died in the Oracle's trials, even though their priestess Olivia literally saw her go into her camp last night. Siana lets everyone down one last time. Olivia challenges Korea to a battle, and the war finally begins. So, the way this seems to work is that they get put in a pocket dimension and fight, but real armies are also fighting outside of the pocket dimension, and the priestess's fight in the pocket dimension determines if the armies in the normal world win. The priestesses have to kill each other, and the one who is alive in the end gets the 2 Kairoshino stones the other possessed. Then the loser's army just backs off and accepts defeat for some reason. Unsurprisingly, when Korea, the trained fighter who has been practicing for months and is recognized by the oracles as a proper priestess, faces against this child who is still crying about going home and has no idea what her magical powers even are, she wins pretty easily. This scares Mushiko, so he follows Korea and Trace while they train and kills Trace because Druid Priestess connection something evil. Trace proclaims his love for Korea as he dies, and she realizes she's loved him all along and now is really sad. The next day, Mushiko's priestess, Tiesa, that's a word, kills the priestess who just woke up from her magic coma, and we reach the final confrontation. And Korea wins by using her magic and the power of love, while Tiesa doesn't even use her powers once. So now, the world is saved because of the heroism, strength, and love of this one raven and crimson-streaked hair girl who was a social outcast. She returns to Melothia with Cisco and they talk about her new job before she disappears and returns to her body in the hospital. But oh golly gosh does she hate Earth because she immediately cries because she isn't special anymore and tells Jasper, the guy who has been trying to keep her alive and has had to watch 2 other people on Earth die to keep her safe, "This world sucks. Bye!" Then she dies and returns to Melothia, where she is promptly kidnapped to set up Book 3. If anything in my retelling confused you, or seemed to never be resolved, or made no sense, let me reassure you that that is because it was like that in the source material. I would love to share all the errors this book contains, but that would mean reading you the entire book. Battle for the Kairoshino Princess didn't just win Bad Writing Bingo, it covered the whole board. Having an edgy, misunderstood, multicolored-haired protagonist, character names switching mid-paragraph, sentences being repeated, letters missing from words like he, incorrect homophone usage, genders being switched, plots that are forgotten, characters that are forgotten, twists that are forgotten. Trace came back from the dead for a scene the author forgot, only to be dead again the next morning. Characters teleport around the world. We learned Kariko was an old priestess 3 times. Pill Nathaniel is a word apparently, and the author kept using undenounced when they meant unbeknownst. The whole thing is a giant mess. And to top it all off, it's clearly a weeb mess. It's literally an isekai with almost every location having a Japanese language inspired name. From the fantasy world's name of Kyukyoku to the Kairoshino stones names like Raitoningyu, Kasai, and Azumita. And as a weeb myself, I don't want to cast too much judgment, but I've also studied a bit of Japanese myself, and it's hilarious when she uses words like majiku poru to mean magical pull, when majiku poru is just the Japanese attempt to say the English words magical pool. I had to know more about the creator of this giant mess, and fortunately for me, the author was so confident in their new hit series that they made a website. A website that is still up. At ImperialLegends.com, you can learn about the entire universe. She's got character bios, maps, descriptions of the Kairoshino stones, even her event schedule from 2019. It even has all of her future entries and their release dates. It also links to the YouTube channel, where you can listen to a 1-minute description of each book or a 23-minute interview she did. Through these videos, I've learned that she likes anime and wrote this series on her phone, neither of which is shocking to me. Plus, the first 2 books were apparently supposed to be one, but it was too long, so she just cut the book in half and sent it out that way, which explains some of the early jank. Some. But I digress. As someone who rants on the internet, I am always walking the fine line between criticism and critique, and I try to do my best to stay positive, to give examples of when a story does something right, along with what I feel it can do better. And with larger productions, this is easier because the target is a big studio with money and power, and no one is really going to feel the effects of my words. But with small passion projects like this, there is always the knowledge that one person was trying their best and honestly thought they had something great to share with the world. I will never disparage that feeling. The act of writing and putting anything out into the world is special and takes great courage. Whether it be fan fiction, art, an internet essay, or a book, letting your creativity be public is a scary thing. But the fact that you've done something scary doesn't protect you from the fact your work isn't perfect. Christina Knapp, your book is honestly the worst book I have ever read. And I say this not to bring you down, though I know that if you were to hear this, it probably would, but to tell you what you need to hear if you really want to improve. Your grammar is poor, and you leave many easily rectified mistakes in your final product. Even the title of this book is misspelled on the spine. If you want to improve, if you want others to really experience your story as best you can tell it, you need to edit your work, and re-edit, and edit some more. And please, for the love of God, stop using the word inseminate. God, it's so gross. And to all my friendly friends who are watching as well, we're just having fun. So I don't want to see anyone bullying her on her YouTube videos or her social media. It's funny to look at this mess and wonder how it ever came to be. Let's keep it that way. Thank you so much for watching, and Happy New Year! Bye-bye! Hi there, it's the end of the video, my friend. Hit the bell if it was okay, I'm sure I'll make good content someday. I'll play some games or do some drawing, Pokemon and fights with darling, video essays and reviews. I couldn't do it without you, so thanks, like and subscribe.